Pippa Gagey. We've still got a lot of people coming into the waiting room, so I'm doing a little bit of a longer shout out today for people as we all Elma and Sam, it's great, good to see you again. Yeah, we're probably going to have less people this week than we have previous weeks because of it being Easter over here. We've had a lot of emails of people saying that they can't make it. So, but anyway, thank you all for being here. I really like doing the whole thing live with the live audience because I think it really adds to the energy of the whole thing. So thank you for making the time to be here. We're on session 3, and we've had quite a lot of messages in the group. If you haven't joined the Facebook group at this point in time, the Real World NLP and HUNA community, then please do. Please join that, because that's the kind of like community that will support these particular 10 sessions. But then also, I'm already starting to think as to what will be the next masterclass that we launch, because we're having such a great time and getting such great feedback that we'll make this the first in a series. And as I say, we've been getting a lot of messages in the group. We've also been getting a lot of emails. So let me just talk a little bit about those right from the start, as to because they're about the really things that were kicked off from the first 2. I think this one is going to answer a lot of those questions. I know we've got Mark here. Mark Hodgson put a message up about not finding it easy to get his thinking around perceptionist projection in certain things, and also thinking about it from a cause and effect and a temporal logical perspective. That's going to be answered tonight, which is why Mark, I didn't answer you on the group because I didn't want to steal my own thunder, as it were. And then also we had an email from somebody, I can't remember who it was now, and was about if you see people doing Liz, yeah, I don't know if Liz is on here this evening, that people doing bad things, evil things, etc., how can you perceive them as being totally healed, whole, and magnificent? I think an important thing that we need to bring into that perspective is the NLP presupposition that people are not their behaviors. So somebody can be totally healed, whole, and magnificent, but then do things that the people might perceive as being not okay. That doesn't mean to say that they're not totally healed, whole, and magnificent. I think if we look to the model from HUNA, and I've got a HUNA intensive coming up in a couple of weeks' time here in the UK, then in NLP and the hypnosis, we've got the idea of there being 2 minds, conscious mind and unconscious mind. In HUNA and another number of other spiritual and esoteric teachings, there is 3 minds: conscious mind, unconscious mind, and higher self. And the higher self is perfect. And as a higher self, being perfect, the law of perception projection still holds true. So as a higher self, you would perceive everything and everybody as being perfect, including your own conscious mind and your own unconscious mind, and anything that your own conscious mind and unconscious mind did. everything will be perfect. So really, when you've really got perceptions projection down 100%, then actually you would become like your higher self in physical incarnation. So on some trainings, I've been asked the question, so did Hitler not have a higher self? Because, of the atrocities that he did and committed and all those kind of things. And of course, yes, Hitler had a higher self. And then the question is, did Adolf Hitler's higher self perceive him as being perfect? Well, yes, his higher self would perceive him as being perfect because everybody's higher self is perfect. So, we've got to start bringing some of the notions and some of the ideas in at this particular point in time. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about this week. And the big thing, and I think this is what's going to answer a lot of people's questions, is that if you're thinking about perception is projection logically, rationally, and sensibly, you won't be able to get your head around it. Because logical, rational, sensible is conscious mind, and projection is from the unconscious mind. And your conscious mind lives in a linear Newtonian universe, whereas your unconscious lives in a nonlinear, more quantum universe. So let's talk about that from a perceptions projection point of view. What it means is that when you send a projection out, it might not come back from the person that you sent it out to. There is an exception to that, which we'll look at in a future session, which is in our intimate relationships, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend relationships. That is an exception to this particular idea of perceptions projection. But other than that, it doesn't come back from the same place that you send it out to. So for instance, if I'm living in a conscious mind, linear Newtonian world, and I've got a tennis ball in my hand, and I throw the tennis ball at that wall over there, it will come back from that wall over there. If I throw it out to that wall over there, it will come back from that wall over there. But that's not the world that your unconscious mind lives in, or the world, therefore, of perceptions projection. So if I throw a tennis ball out to that wall over there, it might come back to me from that wall over there. Or if I throw a tennis ball out over there, it might come back to me down from the ceiling and hit me on the top of the head. So here's a personal experience I had of that. I was doing a training for a department, a division of Microsoft. And, to put a broader thing on the training, it was a sales training, NLP based sales training. And there were 13 people on that training. And the first day was absolutely terrible as an experience for me personally. I got 13 people on the training. I could never get rapport with more than one of them. So when I got rapport with one person, I was out of rapport with the other 12. When I shifted to get rapport with somebody else, I was out of rapport with the other 12, which means they weren't in rapport either. And when I was teaching them some of the basic concepts of NLP and sales, I either got them saying it was complete rubbish, or, yeah, that's okay, but it won't work in Microsoft. So it was a very, very hard work first day. And I actually thought the person who'd hired me would actually say to me at the end of the day, don't bother coming back for the other 2 days. In fact, to a certain extent, I was hoping he was going to say that. But he didn't. And so, I go home that evening, and I'd used all of my NLP master trainer skills for building group rapport, for reframing, etc., 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 and none of it had worked. And I'm pretty good at building group rapport, and I'm pretty good at reframing. And even so, none of it had worked. So I was out of options. And I thought, what am I going to do to turn this training around? And I thought, well, the only thing I've got is perception is projection. So I thought, what's my perception of the group? And my perception was that, first perception was that they were all totally out of rapport with each other. So I asked my unconscious mind the question, so where am I out of rapport with myself? And, whenever you ask your unconscious mind a question, you always get an answer, particularly if you ask a good question, So where am I out of rapport with myself? And my unconscious mind came back with an answer. So I used my NLP and some HUNA techniques to heal that up so that I was back into rapport with myself. And I went, okay, what other perceptions do I have of this particular group? Well, they just shoot anything I say down in flames without even giving it a fair hearing. So I thought, okay, so who in my life and in my environment do I do that with? Who gives me, an idea or something I've thought about, and without even thinking about it, without even giving it a fair hearing, I just go, no, it's not going to work. And a person popped to mind. So all I did at this particular point in time was I made a commitment to myself that in the future, when this person came to me with an idea, I would at least, I'm not going to automatically agree with it, but I would at least give it a fair hearing, and I would at least think about it before I said either yes or no. Went to bed that night, got up the next morning. Oh, by the way, I also use timeline therapy to let go of the fear of going back the next day. And then also what I did, all the drive from Ealing Broadway, which is where I was living at the time, all the way out to Microsoft University in Reading, I hard breathed for the entire drive to give me a good amount of calm, balance, and centered energy. And I walked into the room, and the first thing I noticed was that they're all in rapport with each other. And I thought, that's interesting. And I started out and I got rapport with all 13 people straight away. And, just for those of you who know NLP, this was just a bit of a contrast frame for me. On day one, they thought the idea that 55% of the meaning of communication was in our physiology and only 7% was in our words was the biggest pile of crap they'd ever heard. On day two, they thought the idea of being able to discover somebody's unconscious decision-making strategy by the way that they moved their eyes was so obvious they couldn't believe they'd never thought of it themselves before. Well, for me, 55% of the meaning of communication being in your physiology, and then you can work out what somebody's unconscious decision-making strategy is from the way they move their eyes, is a bit of a leap. And, I got in the car going back home again, and I thought, wow, they were so different. And then I went, though, were they? Were they different? Or was it me that was different? And the only thing that I'd done is I'd done some work on myself between first day and second day, so that my projection on the group was different. So my perception was that they were totally different. But were they really? I mean, there's no way that you'd ever know. And it doesn't actually matter as long as you get the result that you want, and also obviously the result that the person paying the bill wants. So that's the first thing. Projection doesn't necessarily come back from the same place that you send it out. So the question that you've got to ask yourself is, okay, this is my perception of this person. Where in my life do I do the same thing? And then you'll get an answer as far as from a different direction. Then, just to make things even more interesting, not only does your projection not necessarily come back from the person that you're projecting it onto, it doesn't necessarily come back in the same logical form. So let me explain that. For those of you in NLP, what I'm referring to here is the hierarchy of ideas, or chunking. So you might send out the projection in one way, it comes back from a different person as a different example of the way that you sent it out. So let me give you an example. Let me give you an idea around that. So I'm doing practitioner training. I'm teaching perceptions projection. I've got a particular student on the training. This is the first morning on practitioner training. I've got a particular student who's actually, this is from quite a lot, I know him quite well now, and is a good friend of mine. And I'm not going to mention his name. He just put his hands up. And if anybody, I know last week we got some people who got their children with them. I'm going to quote this student directly, so you might just want to cover their ears up a little bit. Because this student of mine said, this perceptions projection thing is total bollocks. And I thought, okay, obviously I need to go away and work on my projections, because this is something we'll talk about in our business session. As a presenter, speaker, and trainer, your audience and your students are your projection. Yikes. But equally, you know, I'm yours, so it's okay. And so he said it's complete bollocks. And I said, well, how do you know that? And he said, well, he manages upcoming sports stars, young sports stars. And he said, I've got a particular young lad that I'm managing. I wanted to get him sponsorship from a well-known US sports brand. And whenever I speak to the person at this particular brand, he always comes back with the same answer. Well, you know, as far as I'm concerned, if it's not American, it's crap. And the student of mine said, you know, and I don't believe that at all. In actual fact, I believe the opposite. My belief is if it is American, it's crap. So if perception projection is true, how can that be the case? Of course, there were other students in the room going, okay, so if it is American, it's crap. Can we just make sure everybody's got their microphones muted? Somebody's got a little bit of bleed through there. Obviously, if it is American, it's crap is equally a projection onto this particular person. So a number of people are going like, oh dear, this guy's digging himself a big hole. And I said to him, well, okay, so what is, if it's not American, it's crap, an example of? And he said, an objection. And I said, okay, and what is an objection an example of? And he said, a judgment, and a bad one. And I said to him, okay, so the question for you then is to ask yourself the question, where do you judge other people in your life badly? And he went into complete, what we call an NLP, transderivational search. His eyes are rolling around in his head. He doesn't have an answer. And I just leave it at that point in time, because I'd already learned by this point in time, when people do that, leave them to process. And he didn't say anything about it for the rest of the day. But I could tell he was still processing my question. And the next day, day 2, practitioner training, he comes in, I'm about to start, his hand goes up, and I said, yeah, you got a question? He said, no, it's not a question. It's a comment. He said, yesterday, I said that perception is projection was bollocks. And I said, I remember that. Yeah. He said, it's not. It's fucking brilliant. His words. I thought, great, I've healed up my projections overnight. Fantastic. And I said, how is that? And he goes, well, you asked me a question yesterday. Where do I judge people in my life and judge them badly? And he said, I'm probably one of the most judgmental people you'll ever meet. He said, I judge everybody badly. As far as I'm concerned, everybody in the world is crap except me. I said, but I decided to change that last night and to stop judging people. And I phoned up the guy from the major US sports brand last night to put forward the same young guy that I'm managing as previously. And he never mentioned once, if it's not American, it's crap. In fact, on Saturday, after the practitioner training finishes, me and the young man are flying off to, I won't say where the city is because you'd work out what the firm was, to America to sign the contract. So there's a couple of things you've got to think about. Non-linear doesn't come back from the same place you're sending it, doesn't come back in the same form. So the strategy then for not coming back in the same form would be to chunk up on your perception and going, okay, what is that an example of? What is that an example of? And what is that an example of? And then going, okay, where do I do that higher level example in other areas of my life? Or in fact, you can go, what are other examples of that to bring you back down and go, whereabouts in my life and with whom in my life do I actually do that? Then you'll start to get some answers from your unconscious mind, not from your conscious mind, because your conscious mind would love to live in a totally linear, logical, rational, sensible universe. And the truth of the matter is we don't. Neither does our unconscious mind. And projection is totally unconscious. Now, the third thing to add to this, just to make things even more interesting, is there could well be a time lag between your projection and it coming back to you as your perception. So this is how it works. Your projections come back in your perception from a distance as a problem. And when I say from a distance, that could be a geographical distance. It comes in as the problem. But you see, the majority of people don't realize it's them. So they see something that they perceive as a problem on the other side of the world, but they go, that's on the other side of the world. That's not me. So they don't do anything with it. Then, a little while later, they perceive the same kind of problem appearing in their country. But it's not them. So they don't know anything about it. Then they perceive, at some point in time afterwards, they perceive the same kind of problem happening in their town or city. But it's not them, so they don't know anything about it. Then at some point in time afterwards, they perceive the same kind of problem happening in their street. But it's not them, so they don't know anything about it. Then finally, the problem comes and goes, bam. And it's right in their face, and it's in their environment, and it's them. Yeah, and then they go, oh, shit. Yep. Now, then they go, oh, okay, this is my problem. But it was, they first perceived it maybe weeks ago on the other side of the planet. But they didn't think it was them. Whereas they could have sorted it out then, but they didn't. So then when you sort it out yourself, what happens is you project it out resolved, as in you project it out as the solution first at home, then in your street, then in your town or city, then in your country, then on the other side of the world. So there is a time lag with this, potentially with this whole thing. So then it's like, okay, the first time you perceive something, even if it's on the other side of the planet, that's the time that you've got the opportunity to work on it. So then you see it resolved there, but it doesn't come any closer. And, you know, I was talking about this the other day when I was planning out this session, and Sally gave me an example that she experienced in her own life. This was a good number of years ago. And sorry, 20 years ago. Okay. Yeah, when she was 18. A friend of hers, Laurie, had a jacket stolen. When they went out for dinner or drinks or whatever, she had this blue leather jacket and it got stolen in the restaurant or the bar or whatever. But that's not Sally. Then her friend, who was actually, she was sharing an apartment with, had her bike stolen from the balcony on the apartment. But that's not Sally. She didn't know anything about it. Then she was going out and doing a training in the US, and the training room got burgled, and they took all of the AV equipment from the training room. But that's not Sally, right? So she didn't do anything about it. And she was doing a training with Tad. So then she'd put all of her luggage in the car to drive down from Orange County down to San Diego, where she was living at the time. And then went back into the hotel to say a quick goodbye to Tad. When she went back out to the car, the rear window on the car was had been smashed, and all of her things had been stolen. And include, that was about $10,000 worth of clothes on it. And then now that's Sally, okay? But she didn't realize when it was on its way in, even though there were 3 examples beforehand as it's coming in, where there was an opportunity to actually resolve that and sort that out. So that's the kind of like non-linearity of the mechanism of projection. And then also, Mark, I know Mark, I can see Mark's there, wave Mark. Yeah, there, Mark, yeah. Another question that Mark had, and actually it was related to the same kind of thing, about from an NLP point of view, having internal representations. But then the internal representation we have from an NLP point of view is a filtered version of the 12 million bits per second coming in from the outside world. So therefore, there's got to be an outside world, which again, conscious mind linearity. But then if you think about it, and we did actually talk about this last week, and I asked all of you on the Zoom call whether you'd had a dream that was so vivid that you didn't realize it was a dream until you woke up. So I think all of you put your hands up. Well, the dream is an internal representation. Without technically, I'm going to say technically, an external event that created that internal representation. Again, what we've got to start thinking about is, with perceptions projection, is in a non-linear way. Where there is an exception to that, is in our personal intimate relationships, as in the person that we live with, or including the person that we might have any contractual agreements with. And we're going to talk about that in a future one of these sessions, because then really to make sense out of that, I'm going to have to introduce you to some certain elements of astrology to make sense out of that. I just noticed we've got 3 people in the waiting room. I'm just going to let them in.
Okay. Done.
Yeah, so over to you guys. I think they've probably had some questions coming in. What are you doing? I haven't got my iPad with me.
Okay. So let me read the questions.
Did you email them to me?
No, not yet. I'll just copy them. How does the shadow influence perception and projection?
So a question we just had come in: how does the shadow affect perceptions projection? So let me just put that into a little bit of context for those people that might not be aware of what the shadow or your shadow is. That's another concept from Carl Jung. And your shadow is the you that you're not consciously aware of. Yeah. So there's who you think you are, and then there's everything else. And a lot of people get it wrong. They're like, "Oh, shadow, evil, dirty, nasty." So that's not what why Carl Jung called it the shadow. He called it the shadow because you can't see your own shadow. So it's the you that you don't know that you are. And it absolutely comes into perceptions projection. And particularly, this is something I'll be talking about in the session I've just been talking about, because you project onto your significant other your shadow. So what your partner in life does is reflect back to you the you that you're not aware that you are. So, Carl Jung actually said a big mistake that a lot of people make is they believe the purpose of a relationship is to get to know the other person. And he said, since that's patently wrong, impossible in the first place, the purpose of a relationship is actually to get to know yourself. And we're going to talk about that in our session on perceptions, projection, and relationships. Because it's the reason why our relationships actually offer, when I talk about relationships, I'm not talking about relationships in general. I'm talking about our intimate relationships, the person we live with. That's why they are actually the most challenging relationships that we have. And also the relationships that give us the greatest opportunity for personal growth, transformation, and development. So we will be talking about that more. But yes, there are certain people in your life that you will project your shadow, which is the you that you're not aware that you are, onto them, and they'll reflect it back to you. And they are more than likely going to be the most challenging relationships in your life until you realize that. And as I think I jokingly said last week, if you're in a relationship and your partner says this is all your fault, then you can actually honestly quite congruently say, yes, I know. And it kind of like makes relationships a lot easier.
Next question. How do we /I sort /clean Putin? This is from Andrew Donovan.
Andrew Donovan wants to know how you can sort out Putin. Well, there's a couple of things here, Andrew, actually. I've been thinking about this quite a lot, because it's in the news a lot. So again, we need to go back to that idea that a person's behavior is not who they are. So, there's who you are, and then the behavior is what you do. So it's more about, you know, looking at the person rather than what they're doing, which is also what your higher self does for you. You know, quite often when I'm teaching Huna particularly, I get people saying, oh, I think I need to go and do a higher self meditation and ask my higher self for forgiveness. Well, no, your higher self totally loves you and perceives you as being completely, totally 100% perfect. So, you know, no matter what you've done in your life, and no matter what your life's current situations or circumstances is, your higher self just goes perfect, which is why you've got to be careful when you ask your higher self questions, because if you say, dear higher self, is it a good idea for me to move to Watford? It will say, perfect. That's, you know, but that doesn't necessarily, but anywhere would be perfect. You know, when I'm teaching Huna out in Hawaii, people go like, you know, I've asked my higher self whether I should move to Hawaii, and it said yes. Well, your higher self's going to go yes to anything because it's all perfect. A better question would be, would moving to Watford or moving to Hawaii serve my higher purpose? And then you'll get either a yes or a no. And quite often when people ask those questions, they get a no. No offense to people who live in Hawaii or in Watford for that matter. But that's the, you know, asking useful questions. So then, and then, you know, here's the other thing, and I mentioned this again, either last week or a week or so ago. What we have is a perception of events that are taking place in another part of the world. Unless we're actually there looking through our own eyes, all we have is a perception. And, you know, something I found really interesting is, you know, we're taught this thing at school called history. Look at the word, his story. History. And I can't remember his definition was now. It might have been, I'll have to check it, but I think it might have been Napoleon, unless somebody knows. But they're going like, history is the story written by the victors, as in it's a story written by the people that won in a particular conflict. So, you know, and I mentioned I've got clients, I've got friends who live in Russia, and what they are getting reported to them through the news is totally different than what we're getting reported here. I remember I was out in the States, and there was a big report here in the US, this is a good number of years ago, that I think it was President Roosevelt, if I've remembered it right from my dates, in the Second World War, knew about the upcoming attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. But he chose not to do anything about it and not to mention it because he wanted a reason for America to go into the war against Japan. And this came out, and it was like a full news report in the UK. And I'm out in Hawaii, and I said to my friend over there, wow, did you see that thing about the president of the US knew about the upcoming attack on Pearl Harbor, but decided not to do anything about it because he wanted a reason to go into the Second World War. And it wasn't reported at all in the US, to the point where my friend went, that's complete rubbish. I've not heard anything about that whatsoever. You're just making it up, Shep. It's your conspiracy theory head coming on again. And then a week or so later, he phoned me up to apologize and said that he'd actually found the report on the BBC with all of the papers and the evidence, but it still has not been reported in the US. So, you know, all we really have is a perception. And then, you know, and as I say, with the strategy I've taught you this week, we have a means of changing that perception. So Andrew, you would know that you had healed up your projection when your perception was, though, you know, obviously none of us actually know this person. Putin, you perceived him as being totally healed, whole, and magnificent. That doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with the person's actions. But what we're talking about is the actions, not the person.
If you perceive something at a distance and you're not triggered by it, do you still have to do release work on it?
Okay, so the question, Ina. So if you perceive something from a distance, but you're not triggered by it, do you still need to do work on it? Is that Ina?
Yeah.
Ina. Yeah. So Ina, what we project out from our unconscious mind are emotions, our beliefs, and our values. So I'm taking it that when you say you perceive something at a distance and it doesn't trigger you, it doesn't trigger a negative emotion or a judgment or any of those kind of things. So then if you see this thing that happens and you go, okay, that's happened, I'm fine with that, then no, there's nothing to do. But you know, even if at a distance, it's okay. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Would you comment on the difference between an observation versus making a projection? I assume it has something to do with the level of the response of the intensity. Would appreciate your perspective. This is from Teresa.
Teresa, yeah. What's my perspective on a observation compared with a projection? An observation and a perception are the same. So what you observe actually is changed by your projection, which is why, you know, and it still amazes me. Police forces around the planet have known this for a long time, that if there was a particular incident, because interestingly, the police here in the UK no longer refer to accidents because they say there's no such thing as an accident. There's always a cause. So if there's a particular incident and there are 30 witnesses and they take a witness statement from those 30 people, they know they're going to get 30 different versions of that incident. Some of them being wildly different from some of the other evidence, some of the other reports, and that's you know, perception is projection, or if you want, observation is projection in a real world example.
Next question. In the following case, what would you ask yourself? War in Ukraine, not me. Terror attack with knife in another city, not me. Terror attack with gun in closer city, not me. Terror attack down the road from me. Is that something we can apply the perception as projection? And what questions should I ask myself? This is from Lior.
Lior. And Lior, I noticed that you marked yourself safe because I think you had a terrorist attack in Tel Aviv recently, so I'm pleased you're well and safe. So the question is, what is your perception of that? Of those different events? What's your perception of those particular incidences? What you might also want to do is to chunk up on those perceptions and go, what is that an example of? Until you come to the same answer for all of them. And then you would then go, okay, so with whom and whereabouts in my life do I do the same thing? So obviously I'm getting a translation from Sally here. And obviously you typed it in. So we've got perceptions of perceptions of perceptions. But there was one word that you had in common in the version I heard for each of those events, which was attack. So you might then want to go, okay, so what is attack an example of? And what is that an example of? And then go, and whereabouts in your life, in your environment, in your world, and with whom do you do the same thing with? And when you've got an answer, you either then resolve that using, I know you know NLP already, timeline therapy, or even just going, okay, I actually do that with that person. And you can actually resolve it just by going, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to make a conscious decision to stop that particular behavior in that particular, with that particular person or that particular context. That's the strategy to use with that.
Okay, Nick Burrow, if I imagine everyone as being a billionaire, will that help?
Nick, love it. Yes, because this is something we're going to cover in a later one. You guys are brilliant because you're ahead of the game here with me. Is that everything you think or say about everybody and everything is a suggestion upon which your unconscious mind acts. So let me say that again. So your unconscious mind's eavesdropping on everything you think and everything you say. It takes everything you think and everything you say about everything and everybody as a suggestion upon which it acts. And I'll give you, when we actually get to that session, I'll talk you through some more examples of that. But yeah, I mean, basically, Nick, the thing to do would be to think everybody up. And then, because when you point one finger out at somebody else, wow, they're really good at that. They're really doing well. Wow, that's really fantastic. You've got 3 pointing back at you, which is the suggestion that your unconscious mind accepts. So, I was doing a seminar with a guest, a friend of mine, Greg Secker, and one of his beliefs was that 95% of life's problems can be solved by writing a check. Quite a good belief. Though I don't know even where my checkbook is these days, to be honest. But anyway, and people in the audience started shouting out, "What about love? What about gratitude? What about whatever?" To the point where I actually had to shut the group down and go like, "Shut up, you lot! You're NLP practitioners. What about respecting other people's models of the world for a start? Day one, NLP practitioner." And Greg was a bit confused. And but he nailed it, because what he said was, "I've obviously got this wrong. I thought you came here today to learn how to make more money and to become rich. How many people here came here today to learn how to make more money and to become more rich and wealthy? And everybody put their hands up. And he said, well, here's my first tip. Stop hating rich people. Because if you hate rich people, your unconscious mind will not allow you to become rich. Because then you'd have to hate yourself. Yep. So, so yeah, Nick, that's the thing. Think other people up. When you look outside, they're doing well. That's great. That's fantastic. Brilliant. Your unconscious mind is taking that as a suggestion upon which it will act.
Next question. What's the relationship between perceptionist projection and the reticular activating system? Good question.
What's the relationship between perceptionist projection and the reticular activating system? Yeah. So your reticular activating system does a number of things for you. One is it shuts off your body from your brain when you're asleep. Except if you've got a habit of sleepwalking, that's when the reticular activating system doesn't switch off the body, and so you're dreaming, but your actual body's moving around. But also, it's like a radio set. So you've got all that 12 million bits of information coming in per second, and there are literally millions of radio stations transmitting at this point in time around the world. Then when you take a radio set and you tune the dial, you tune in to one particular station. And you turn the volume up on that station you want to listen to, and you turn the volume down on everything else. So that radio station then is all that you are aware of in your perception, even though all these other millions of radio stations are broadcasting around the world. So if we thought about, I think of the reticular activating system almost like goal radar. When you set a goal and you set it very, very, what we call from an NLP, congruently, then you tell your reticular activating system, filter through all of these 12 million bits of information per second that's coming in and find me this. It matches the pattern. That's if you're looking at it from on the way in. If we're looking at it from the way out, then when we set a goal, we actually project out that goal into our environment, and then consciously via the reticular activating system, we perceive it coming back in, which is when we've achieved the goal. Good question. Never had that question before.
Is there a set process that can be applied to any that needs to be worked on?
Is there a set process? So a set process that we can apply to anything. I'm thinking actually I was looking at the schedule that we got, and you guys have been on the program. The questions you've been asking are you're ahead of the game. So I'm thinking that the next session we're going to start talking about what we can do to change our projections. And then when we've been through all of the sessions, I'm going to put together a perceptionist projection cheat sheet, which is like a single-sided piece of A4 with all of the bullet points as reminders from the 10 sessions, and also the kind of questions you'd want to ask yourself to discover what your projections are and what it is to work on. And I'm going to put that together, so that's ready by the final session, and then we'll make that available to everybody that's registered for for the sessions, because only if you've done all the sessions or watched the replays would the cheat sheet actually make sense. So it won't be on general release, but we'll make it available to everybody who's registered to the to these Zoom sessions.
If my partner doesn't think I can make money doing something that is just me, unconsciously saying, I don't believe I can, even though consciously I think I can. So if my partner doesn't think I can make money, is that just me unconsciously saying I don't believe it, even though consciously I think I can?
Yes, so that would be an unconscious belief that you couldn't make money, which is in your shadow, which is what you project onto your partner. So it doesn't actually matter what you think consciously with regard to money. The thing that matters is what you are unconsciously projecting. And to say the shadow is the you that you're unconscious about. So yes, this is why our partners are absolutely brilliant and fantastic barometers for us to know what's actually happening at the really deep part of our unconscious mind. It's 8 o'clock. So
Rennie Matthews,
Mhm.
I like to think of perception as being a direct confirmation of the current energy frequency that you're resonating at.
Yeah, so Rennie, that's Rennie Matthews,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yep. Rennie asked a question, or made a comment rather, that your current, he likes to think of it as your current perception is the frequency that you are resonating at, and therefore we could say projecting, or we could say broadcasting. I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that, which is why then you know, and we talked about projecting emotions, and that's all emotions. You know, we talked about negative emotions, but it's also positive emotions. So you know, if you are resonating, vibrating with the emotion of love, that's a different frequency than the emotion of anger or hate or whatever. And so because you are then projecting love rather than hate and anger, then your perception is that there will be a lot more love in the world than hate in the world. So yes, I would totally agree with that, Rennie. Yeah, definitely. And we've run for an hour now for what's supposed to be a 30-minute session. Any other outstanding questions? We only want outstanding questions, by the way, not just any old question. Outstanding questions. Put them into the Real World NLP and HUNA community group, and I'll check those over the weekend and answer those over the next few days. Give me a thumbs up if that was a useful session. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful Easter or holiday break, whatever you choose to call it this weekend. That's what we've got in the UK. I don't know what there is in other parts of the world. You know, whatever you're doing this weekend, have a great time. Stay safe. Love you lots, and we'll see you here, same bat time, same bat channel next week.